Hello, welcome to Professor Fox's Cozy Corner. We're going to be reading. Wrinkle in Time for you today. Wrinkle in Time. Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. She's a classic author writer. And she wrote other books, The Arm of the Starfish, The Journey with Johanna, and A Wind in the Door. Let's get started here. Well, this book was written in 1962. One of the best classic fantasy novels. A little bit of science fiction, a little bit of a fantasy. Really check it out. Hello, Professor Fox here. We are reading A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. So, Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. We're on chapter 2, Mrs. Who. So, when Meg woke to the jangling of her alarm clock, the wind was still blowing, but the sun was shining. The worst of the storm was over. She sat up in bed, shaking her head to clear it. It must have been a dream. She's been frightened by the storm and worried about the tramp. So she just dreamed about going down to the kitchen and seeing Mrs. Whatsit and having her mother get all frightened, upset by that word. What was it? Tess something. She dressed hurriedly, picked up the kitten, still curled up in the bed, and dumped it unceremoniously on the floor. The kitten yawned, stretched, gave a piteous meow, trotted out of the attic and down the stairs. Meg made her bed and hurried after it. In the kitchen, her mother was making French toast, and the twins were already at the table. The kitten was lapping up milk out of a saucer. French toast. Now, French toast, I really do enjoy French toast as well. Who else enjoys French toast in the morning? I think when you were a kid, especially at the age of Meg's age, I think French toast was one of the most delicious things you could have. So my name's Professor Fox. I am an English teacher, and I read classic literature. And today we're reading A Wrinkle in Time. Wrinkle in Time, part fantasy, part science fiction. One of the inspirations, you can look at this as to, TV shows such as Doctor Who. Definitely one of the inspirations here is this book. Where's Charles? Mag asked. Still asleep. We had a rather interrupted night, if you remember. I hoped it was a dream, Meg said. Her mother carefully turned out 4 saucers of French toast and said in a steady voice, No, Meg, don't hope it was a dream. I don't understand any more than you do, but one thing I've learned is that you don't have to understand things for them to be. I'm sorry. I showed you I was upset. Your father and I used to have a joke about tesseract. What is a tesseract? Meg asked. It's a concept. Miss Murry handed the twins that syrup. Oh, hello from California. Okay, you're from California. So I am a teacher in Ohio. Central Ohio. I don't see why you didn't wake up, Denise said. It's a gape I was missing out on, all the fun. You'll be a lot more awake in school today than I will. Meg took her French toast to the table. Who cares, Sandy said. If you're going to let out old tramps come into the house in the middle of the night, Mother, you ought to have a den and me around to protect you. Oh, it's Men's Mental Health Day. Yeah. That's pretty... Thank you for letting me know that, Logan. We know you have a great mind and all, Mother, Sandy said, but you don't have much sense. And certainly Meg and Charles don't. I know. We're morons. Meg was bitter. I wish you wouldn't be such a dope. Meg, syrup, please. Sandy reached across the table. You don't have to take everything so personally. Use a happy medium, for heaven's sake. You just goof around in school and look out the window and don't pay any attention. You just make things harder for yourself, Denny said, and Charles Wallace is going to have an awful time next year when he starts school. We know he's bright, but he's so funny when he's around other people and they're so used to thinking he's dumb. I don't know what's going to happen to him, Sandy, and I'll sock anybody who picks on him, but that's all we can do. Let's not worry about next year till we get through. What book is this? This is Wrinkle in Time, a classical literature, a little bit of science fiction, a little bit of fantasy. One of the classics I think you should read. It's more for, when you go through adolescence and you have independent thought. This is a little coming of age of that, and it also has this fantasy element of good versus evil throughout the story. But definitely one I recommend to... I would usually do this for a middle school group I had. You could do maybe freshman, high school. You could read this book. It would be good for the class. Definitely something you would need for your SATs or ACTs, because there's going to be questions about this book in those. At school, Meg was tired and her eyelids sagged. Her mind wandered. In social studies, she was asked to name the principal imports and experts. And through she had looked them up doubtfully the evening before. Now she could remember none of them. The teacher was sarcastic. The rest of the class laughed, and she flung herself down in her seat in a fury. Who cares about the imports and exports, anyhow, she muttered. If you're going to be rude, Margaret, you may leave the room, the teacher said. Okay, I will, Meg flounced. During study hall, the principal sent for her. What seems to be the problem now, Meg? He asked, pleasantly enough. Meg looked skulking down at the floor. Nothing, Mr. Jenkins. Miss Potter tells me you were inexcusably rude. Meg shrugged. Don't you realize that you just make everything harder for yourself by your attitude? The principal asked. Now, Meg, I'm convinced that you can do the work and keep up with the grade if you will apply yourself, but some of your teachers are not. You're going to have to do something about yourself. Nobody can do it for you. Meg was silent. Well, what about it, Meg? I don't know what to do, Meg said. You could do your homework, for one thing. Wouldn't your mother help you? If I asked her to. Meg, is something troubling you? Are you unhappy at home? Mr. Jenkins asked. At last, Meg looked up, pushing out her glasses in a characteristic gesture. Everything is fine at home. I'm glad to hear it, but I know it must be hard for you to have your father away. So, this is a typical conversation that you have in adolescence. My son's going through this. You're having these independent thoughts. You don't want to do your homework. You're getting in trouble at school. This is why Meg is such a relatable character to a lot of us. We all go through this in our own way. We always go through some kind of rebellion. We don't want to go with the mold. And this is okay. This is even as a teacher, it can be annoying for me, but it's good for you to develop independent thought. It's good for you to develop your own person. You don't have to always go with everything that everybody says. Be your own person. And that's kind of what this whole story is about. Meg eyed the principal wearily and ran her tongues over the barbed line of her braces. Have you had any news from him lately? Meg was sure it was not only imagination that made her feel that behind Mr. Jenkins' surface concern was a gleam of vivid curiosity. Wouldn't he like to know, she thought, and if I know anything, isn't that the last person I'd tell? Well, one of the last. The postmistress must know that it is almost a year now since the last letter, and had known how many people she'd told, or what unkind guesses she'd made about the reason for your long silence. Mr. Jenkins waited for an answer, but Meg only shrugged. Just what is your father's line of business? Mr. Jenkins asked. Some kind of scientist, wasn't he? He's a physicist. Meg bared her teeth. Yeah, you know. Interesting. Meg, don't you think you make a better adjustment to life if you face facts? I do. Some people, some people like to do silly things. Yeah, you guys are fun today. Now, when we do things that can be harmful to other people, it's really sad that you do that. But it's best just to ignore people that like to put weird things in the comments. Just what your father's line of business? Mr. Jenkins asked. Some kind of scientist. He is a physicist. Meg bared her teeth to reveal the two vicious lines of her braces. Meg, don't you think you make a better adjustment to life if you face facets? Stop belling, Mr. Jenkins said sharply. Do you want the entire school to hear you? So what? Meg demanded. I'm not ashamed of anything I'm saying, are you? Mr. Jenkins sighed. Do you enjoy being the most belligerent, uncooperative child in school? Meg ignored this. She leaned over the desk toward the principal. Mr. Jenkins, you met my mother, haven't you? You can't accuse her of not facing facts. I don't know why people are so hateful in this world. It's best just to ignore hateful speech and people that like to say harmful things. Meg, he said impatiently. I know, but why should we go to see her now? I want to find out more about the Tesseract thing. Didn't you see how it upset her mother? When your mother can't control the way she feels, when she lets us see she's upset, then it's something big. Meg thought for a moment. Okay, let's go, but let's take our dog with us. Well, of course he needs the exercise. She set off, the dog rushing ahead, then doubling back to the two children and leaping off again. The Murrays lived about 4 miles out of the village. Behind the house was a pine woods, and it was through this that Charles Wallace took Meg. Charles, she's going to get in awful trouble. Miss Whatsit, if they find out she's broken into the haunted house and taking the streets and everything, they could send her to jail. One of the reasons I wanted to go over this afternoon was to warn them. Them. I told you she was there with her two friends. I'm not even sure if it was Miss Whatsit herself who took the sheets, though I wouldn't put it past her. But what would she want with all those sheets for? I tended to ask her. Charles Wallace said to tell you them the better to be more careful. I don't really think they'd let anybody find him, but I just thought we ought to mention the possibility. Sometimes during our vacation, some of the boys go out there looking for frills. But I don't think anybody apt to right now with what the basketball and everything. They walk in silence for a moment through the fragrant woods, the rusty pine needles gentle under their feet. Up above them, the wind made music in the branches. Charles Wallace slipped his hand confidently in Meg's, and then the sweet little boy gesture warmed her so that she felt the tense knot inside her began to loosen up. Charles loves me at any rate, she thought. School's awful again today, he asked after a while. Yes, I got sent to Mr. Jenkins. He made me snide remarks about my father. Charles Wallace nodded strangely. I know. How do you know? Charles Wallace shook his head. I can't quite explain. You tell me, that's all. But I never say anything. You just seem to know. Everything about you tells me, Charles said. How about the twins? Meg asked. Do you know about them too? I suppose I could if I wanted to, if they needed me, but it's a sort of a tiring, so I just concentrate on you and Mother. You mean you read our minds, Charles Wallace looked troubled. I don't think of it like that. It's being able to understand a sort of language, like sometimes if I concentrate very hard, I can understand the wind. You know, sometimes it's best to just keep certain people out of the chat. The answer to that question is no. All right, where are we? You mean you read minds? Charles Wallace looked troubled. I don't think of it that. It's being able to understand a certain language, like sometimes if I concentrate very hard, I can understand the wind talking with the trees. You can tell me you see sort of a avid invertly. That's a good word, isn't it? I got Mother to look it up in the dictionary for me this morning. I really must learn to read, except I'm afraid it will make it awful hard to make for me in school next year if I already know things. I think if it will be better if people go on thinking if I'm not very bright, they wouldn't hate me quite so much. Ahead of the dog started barking loudly, the warning bay that usually told them that a car was coming up the road, that someone was at the door. Somebody's here, Charles Wallace said sharply. Somebody's hanging around the house. Come on, he started to run, his short legs straining. So, this is her brother, Charles Wallace. To her, he can read minds. But I see it more of as he's in tune with the family members. And he knows that she's troubled right now because she's going through a lot of things with school, going through a lot of things with her dad not being there. And he's trying to comfort her, but he can also read her emotions. It's showing empathy to another person, showing that you care about that person. And you can pick up, and they don't have to tell you anything, and you know what's going on. That's the kind of relationship Charles Wallace has with Meg. And it's an important relationship to have. The dog stood in front of the boy, barking furiously. As they came panting up, the boy said, "For crying out loud, call off your dog." "Who is he?" Charles Wallace asked Meg. "Calvin. He's in a regional, but he's older than I am. He's a big bub. It's all right, fella. I'm not going to hurt you, the boy said to the dog. Set fort, Charles Wallace commanded, and the dog dropped in his hunches in front of the boy, a low growl still pulsing in his dark throat. Okay. Charles Wallace put his hands on his hips. Now tell us what you're doing here. I might ask the same of you, the boy said with some indignance. Aren't you two of the Murry kids? This isn't your property, is it? He started to move. But the dog growled grew louder, and he stopped. Tell me about him, Charles Wallace demanded. What would I know about him, Meg asked. He's a couple of grades above me, and he's on the basketball team. Just because I'm tall, Calvin sounded a little embarrassed. Tall he certainly was, and skinny. His brawny wrist struck out of his sleeve of his blue sweater. His worn cardigan trousers were 3 inches too short. He had orange hair that needed cutting, and the appropriate freckles to go with it. His eyes were oddly blue. Tell us what you're doing here, Charles Wallace said. What is this? The 3rd degree? Aren't you the one who's supposed to be the moron? Meg flushed with rage, but Charles Wallace answered passively. That's right. If you want to call me my dog off, you better give. Most particular moron I ever met, Calvin said. I just come to get away from my family. Charles Wallace, no. What kind of family? They all have runny noses? I'm 3rd from the top of 11 kids. At the Charles Wallace grinned widely, so am I. And I don't mean like it in baseball, Calvin said. Neither do I. I mean like in biology, Calvin said suspiciously. A change in gene, Charles Wallace quoted, resulting in the appearance of an offspring of a character which is not present in the parents, by which is potentially transmissible to his offspring. What gives around here? Calvin asked. I was told you couldn't talk. Thinking I'm a moron gives people something feel smug about, Charles Wallace said. Why should I delusion them? How old are you, Cal? 14. What grade? Junior. 11th. I'm bright. Listen, did anybody ask you to come here this afternoon? Charles Wallace, holding the dog by the collar, looked at Calvin suspiciously. What do you mean, ass? Calvin shrugged. You still don't trust me, do you? I don't distrust you, Charles Wallace said. Do you want to tell me why you're here, then? The dog and Meg and I decided to go for a walk. We often do it in the afternoon. Calvin dug his hands down in his pockets. You're holding out on me. So you're... Charles Wallace said. Okay, old sport, Calvin said. I'll tell you this much sometimes. I get a feeling about things. Might call it a compulsion. Do you know what a compulsion means? Constraint, obligation, because one is compelled. Not a very good definition, but it is concise. Oxford. Okay, Calvin sighed. I must remember I am preconditioned in my concept of my mentality. Meg sat down on the coarse grass at the edge of the woods. The dog gently twisted his collar out of Charles Wallace's hand and came over to Meg, lying down beside her and putting his head in his lap. Calvin tried how politely to direct his words toward Meg as well as Charles Wallace. When I get this feeling, this compulsion, I always do what it tells me. I can't explain where it comes from or how I get it. And it doesn't happen very often. But I obey it. And this afternoon I had a feeling that I must come over to the haunted house. That's all I know. Kid, I'm not holding anything back. Maybe it's because I'm supposed to meet you. You tell me. So thank you for liking the live. I really appreciate that. And thank you for the follows. Appreciate this. I like to read classic literature, talk about it. I'm a teacher. We're reading A Wrinkle in Time, and this is about individuality and coming of age. Plus, we have fantasy elements in here, and we have science fiction elements, and they all blend together over the overlapping thing of good versus evil and doing what's right. You know, this guy likes to draw funny pictures on here. You got it big when a guy wants to take up his time to make pictures on your live. Thank you for your support there. But yeah, very good. It's best just to ignore that. Constant obligation because one is spelled. So we're talking about Calvin here. Calvin would be what I would like to call as an empathic child. And what I mean by an empathic child is someone that has intuition, someone that is willing to tap into their inner thoughts and act upon them in a way that it almost feels like he can predict the future. Because he's willing to take his thought and what he has a feeling of and bring it into reality. Or a better way of explaining it is, if you know what the law of attraction is, that's kind of what Calvin is doing. He's believing in this stuff and believing that he has to meet this person at this time, and so it does happen because the universe responds to his law of attraction. That's how I see Calvin in this particular moment. Charles Wallace looked at not Calvin, sorry about that. Calvin is the boy he's talking to. I'm talking about Charles Wallace being the empath. Charles Wallace looked at Calvin probingly for a moment. Then at an almost gaze came into his eyes, and he seemed to be thinking at him. Calvin stood very still and waited. At least, Calvin Wallace said, "Okay, I believe you, but I can't tell you. I think I'd like to trust you maybe. You better come home with us and have dinner." "Well, sure, but what would your mother say to that?" Calvin asked. "She'd be delighted. Mother's all right. She's not one of us, but she's all right." "What about Meg?" "Meg is tough," Charles Wallace said. "She's not really one thing or another." "What do you mean, one of us?" Meg demanded. "What do you mean I'm not one of or the other?" "Not now, Meg," Charles Wallace said slowly. "I'll tell you about it later." He looked at Calvin, then seemed to make a quick decision. "Okay, let's take him to meet Miss Whatsit. If it's not okay, she'll know." He started off on his short leg toward the old house. The haunted house was half in the shadow of the clump of elms in which it stood. The elms were almost bare now, and the ground around the house was yellow with damp leaves. The late afternoon light had a greenish cast, which the blank window reflected in a sinister way. Which in the blank windows reflected to an unhinged shutter thumped. Something else creaked. Meg did not wonder what the house had a reputation for being haunted. A board was nailed across the front door, but Charles Wallace led the way around the back. The door there appeared to be nailed shut, too, but Charles Wallace knocked, and the door swung slowly outward, creaking on rusty hinges. Up in one of the elms, an old black crow gave a ruckus cry, and a woodpecker went into a wildered rattling. A large gray scuttered around the corner of the house, and Meg let out a stifled shriek. That's a good description of a haunted house, like your typical haunted house. I really like the rusty creak of doors opening. You really hear that. That's a very good description that Madeleine L'Engle is doing there. They get a lot of fun out of using all the topical props. Charles Wallace said in a reassuring voice, "Come on, follow me." Calvin put a strong hand to Meg's elbow. The dog pressed against her leg, happiness that the concern was so strong in her that her panic fled, and she followed Charles Wallace into the dark recess of the house without fear. They entered into a sort of kitchen. There was a huge fireplace with a big black pot hanging over it. Why had there been no smoke visible from the chimney? Something in the pot was bubbling, and it smelled more like one of Miss Murry's chemical messes than something to eat. In a dilapidated Boston rocker sat a plump little woman. She wasn't Miss Whatsit, so she must. Meg decided to be one of Miss Whatsit's two friends. She wore enormous spectacles, twice as thick and twice as large as Meg's. And she was sewing busily with rapid jabbling stitches on a sheet. Several other sheets lay on the dusty floor. Charles Wallace went up to her. "I really don't think you ought to have taken the sheets without consulting me," he said, as cross and bossy as only as a very small boy can be. "What on earth do you want from them for?" The plump little woman beamed at him. "Why, Charles, my pet." She says something in French. "The heart as his reasons, whereof reason knows nothing. But that's not appropriate at all," Charles said crossly. "Your mother would find it so." A smile seemed to gleam through the roundness of her spectacles. "I'm not talking about my mother's feelings about my father," Charles Wallace scolded. "I'm talking about the sheets." The little woman sighed, and Norma's glasses caught the light again and shone like an owl's eyes. "In case we need ghosts, of course," she said. "I shouldn't think you have guessed. If we have to frighten anybody away, what's it thought, we ought to do it appropriately. That's why it's so much fun to stay in a haunted house, but we really don't mean you to know about the sheets." She says something in German, and then in Latin, caught in the act. English was I was saying. But Charles Wallace held up his hand in a gesture. "Miss Who, do you know this boy?" Calvin bowed. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I didn't catch your name." "Miss Who will do," the woman said. "He wasn't my ideal, Charles, but I think it's a good one." "Where's Miss What's-it at?" Charles asked. "She's busy." "It's getting near time. Charlesly getting near time." She says another thing in Latin. "And it's very good man, Charles. Darling. But right now he needs our help." "Who?" Meg demanded. "And little Megsie. Lovely to meet you, sweetheart. Your father, of course. Now go home, loves. The time is not yet ripe. Don't worry, we won't go without you. Get plenty of food and rest. Feed Calvin up. Now I'm with you." She says another thing in Latin. "Faith is the sister of justice. Trust in us. Now shoo!" And she fluttered up from her chair and pushed him out the door with surprising power. "Charles," Meg said, "I don't understand." Charles took her by the hand and dragged her away from the house. The dog ran on ahead, and Calvin was close behind him. "No," he said, I don't either yet. Not quite. I'll tell you what I know as soon as I can. But you saw the dog, didn't you? Not a growl, not a quiver, not as just fro. There wasn't anything strange about it, so you know it's okay. Look, do me a favor, both of you. Let's not talk about it till we had something to eat. I need fuel so I can sort things out and assimilate them properly." "Lead on, moron," Calvin cried. "I've never even seen your house, and I have the funniest feeling that for the first time in my life, I'm going home." Well, thank you. Yeah. So we're starting to get into the more fantasy element. We got a bunch of, we got Miss What's-it, we got Miss Who, and our next chapter, we got Miss Witch. We got Calvin, who, at this moment, I don't think he has any special powers. It's more of he has a more clairvoyance or just empathic knowing about people. But we'll see if that develops into anything else. We're reading A Wrinkle in Time. This is one of them nice classic stories. It's, something I think you should read. A little bit of independence here and coming to age story with fantasy elements and the overarching theme of good versus evil. I will pin it in case you are interested. You can buy your own copy of Wrinkle in Time. I do recommend this as a story you should read for yourself if you haven't already. Most high schools, some middle schools will have you read this as part of your literature class. But a very great book. I'm also going to give a shout out to one of my independent authors that I enjoy. He's here on TikTok. and it is Michael Lomano, Misconnection. I enjoy this book. If you like true crime with a little bit of thriller, it's a very interesting read. The twists and turns keep happening. There's this fateful meeting at a park, and he meets a young lady, and he has to pursue her, and then all these other things in his life start to unfold. So check it out, Michael Lomano's book, Misconnection. And I do recommend this book. It was a short read for me. Michael does a good job of making things interesting. How are you doing, Jarvis? I'm just giving a shout out to my independent author on TikTok, one of my friends, Misconnection. This should be a book you should check out. But we are reading A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. It's a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of science fiction. And it's been a pretty good journey right so far. We have met the Murrays. They have a bunch of different kids. Our main character is Meg. She's struggling with school. They keep asking her where her father is. She's still having a hard time at school. She's going through the same things that my son is going through. Do I want to do my homework? I don't really care about what you guys have to say. A little bit rebellious. Everybody says she's a bad student. You know, the typical things. And it's okay if we go through this as a child. It's okay to rebel. We need to rebel to form our individuality. We're not bad kids because we rebel. We are bad kids. You know, I would rather you rebel against things than just always follow the group. You can get yourself into a whole lot more trouble by following the group than being your own individual. Now, let's take it as a teacher. Now, I will say I do get into heated discussion with children that are a little more independent. But it's okay. So now we're going to read Chapter 3, Miss Witch. So this isn't spelled like a witch that does a cauldron, but this is the word witch. So which way would I go? That's Miss Witch. In the forest, evening was already beginning to fall, and they walked in silence. Charles and Dog grumbled on ahead. Calvin walked with Meg, his fingers barely touching her arm in a protective gesture. This has been the most impossible, the most confusing afternoon of my life, she thought. Yet I don't feel confused or upset anymore. I only feel happy. Why? Maybe we aren't meant to meet before this, Calvin said. I mean, I know who you were in school and everything, but I didn't know you. But I'm glad we're met now, Meg. We're going to be friends, you know? I'm glad too, Meg whispered, and they were silent again. When they got back to the house, Miss Murry was still in the lab. She was watching a pale blue fluid move slowly through a tube from a beaker over a Bunsen burner, bubbled in a big earthling dish of stew. Don't tell Sandy and Denny. I'm cooking out here, she said. They're always suspicious that a few chemicals may get in with the meat, but I had an experiment I wanted to stay with. This is Calvin O'Calf, Mother, Meg said. Is there enough for him, too? It smells supper. Hello, Calvin. Miss Murry shook her hands with him. Nice to meet you. We haven't anything but stew tonight, but it's a good thick one. Sounds wonderful to me, Calvin said. May I use your phone so my mother will know where I am? Of course, show him where it is. Will you please, Meg? I won't ask you to use the one out here. If you don't mind, I'd like to finish up my experiment. Meg led the way into the house. Charles Wallace and Dog had gone off. Outdoors, she could hear Sandy and Dennis humming at the fort that they were building up in one of the maples. This way, Meg. went through the kitchen and into the living room. I don't know why I call her when I don't come home, Calvin said, his voice bitter. She wouldn't notice. He sighed and dialed. Ma, he said. Oh, Hinky, tell Ma I won't be home till late. Now don't forget, I don't want to be locked out again. He hung up and looked at Meg. Do you know how lucky you are? She smiled rather wearily. Not most of the time. A mother like that. A house like this. Gee, your mother's gorgeous. You should see my mother. She had all her upper teeth out and Pop got her a plate, but she won't wear it. And most days she doesn't even comb her hair. Not that it makes much difference when she does. He clenched his fist. But I love her. That's the funny part of it. I love them all, and they don't give a hoot about me. Maybe that's why I call when I'm not going to be home, because I care. Nobody else does. You don't know how lucky you are to be loved. Meg said in a startled way, I guess I never thought of that. I guess I just took it for granted. Calvin looked somber, and then his enormous smile up in his face again. Things are going to happen, Meg. Good things. I feel it. He began wandering still slowly around the pleasant and shabby living room. He stopped before a picture on the piano, a small group of men standing together on a bench. Who's this? Oh, a bunch of scientists. Where? Meg went over the picture. Cape Canaveral. This one's father. Which? Here. The one with glasses. Yep, the one who needs a haircut, Meg giggled, forgetting her worries and her pleasant at showing Calvin the picture. His hair's sort of the same color as mine, and he keeps forgetting to have to cut it. Mother usually ends up doing it for him. She brought clippers and stuff because he won't take the time to go to the barber. Calvin studied the picture. I like him, he announced. Looks kind of like Charles Wallace, doesn't he? Meg laughed again. When Charles was a baby, he looked exactly like Father. It was really funny. Calvin continued to look at the picture. He's not handsome or anything, but I like him. Meg was indignant. He is too handsome. Calvin shook his head. Nah, he's tall and skinny. Like me. You know, you guys are interesting people in the morning. That's okay. So sometimes you gotta ignore what's in the comments. People put interesting things in there. You know, as we're talking about this book and, you know, we're seeing some of these interesting comments, it shows that, you know, these people on here, they like to rebel and put things out there. Very interesting. But just ignore it and we'll continue. So, Meg is introducing Charles Wallace to her family. And before this chapter, we had Meg was kind of upset with her family, felt like a little bit of an outcast. But Calvin, as a foil to this, is showing her she's got it pretty good. He's like, your mom's awesome. This is great. You know, your dad's not the most handsome of guy, but he looks cool. So she's starting to appreciate things that she never appreciated by meeting this new person that's giving her a different perspective in life. Well, I think you're handsome, Meg said. Father's eyes are kind of like yours too, you know. Really blue, only you don't notice his as much because of the glasses. Where is he now? Meg stiffened, but she didn't have to answer because the door from the lag kitchen slammed. And Miss Murry came in carrying a dish of stew. Now she called, I'll finish this up properly on the stove. Have you done your homework, Meg? Not quite, Meg said, going back to the kitchen. Then I'm sure Calvin won't mind if you finish before dinner. Sure, go ahead, Calvin fished his pocket and pulled out a wad of folded paper. As a matter of fact, I have some junk of mine to finish up. Math. That's one thing I had a hard time keeping up in. I'm okay. Oh, hey, thank you for giving me a good morning. Thank you for that. You have a good morning as well. We're reading A Wrinkle in Time. And these two children doing math homework. Pretty exciting. That's one thing I've had a hard time keeping up with, and I'm okay on anything to do with words. But I don't do as well with numbers. Miss Murry smiled. Why don't you get Meg to help you? But see, I'm several grades above Meg. Try asking her to help you with math. Anyhow, Miss Murry suggests. Well, sure, Calvin said. Here. But it's pretty complicated. Meg smoothed out the paper. Study it. Do they care how you do it? She asked. I mean, can you work it out your own way? Well, sure, as long as I understand and I get the right answer. Well, we have to do it their way. Now look, Calvin, don't you see how much easier it would be if you did it this way? Her pencil flew over the paper. Hey! You know, you're a very unique person there. Yeah. Again, Meg's pencil was busy. All you have to remember is that every ordinary fraction can be converted into an infinite periodic decimal fraction. See? So, 3 over 7 is 0.428288571. This is the craziest family, Calvin grinned at her. I suppose I should stop being surprised by now. You're supposed to be dumb in school, always being called up on the carpet. Oh, I am. The trouble with Meg and math, Miss Murry said briskly, is that Meg and her father used to play with the numbers, and Meg learned far too many shortcuts, so when they want her to do the problem the long way around at school, she gets swollen and stubborn and sets up a fine mental block for herself. I feel this is happening more and more at schools. We are so focused on getting the children to do it the way that we think is best. And this is really what this story is about at the heart of it. The Wrinkle in Time is about a story of how to be independent. And because a child is not doing what you want them to do or doing it a different way, doesn't make it wrong. If they want to do math their own way, let them do math their own way. They got to get the right answer. And if whatever way they came about it and they were able to solve the problem, that's great. That's okay. They don't need to learn how to do it your way. Your way might not be the best way for them. It might also help if Meg's handwriting were legible. Miss Murry said with a good deal of difficulty, I can usually decipher it, but I doubt very much if her teachers can. Or are you willing to take the time? I'm planning on giving her a typewriter for Christmas. That may be a help. If I get anything right, nobody believes it's me, Meg said. Calvin asked. One of the father's nicknames for me, Meg said, is also 3.26 million light years. What's E equals mc squared? Einstein's equation. What's E stand for? Energy. M, mass. C squared, the square velocity of light in centimeters per second. But what countries Peru bounded? I haven't the faintest idea. I think it's South America, else somewhere. What's the capital of New York? Well, New York City, of course. Who wrote Boswell's Life of Johnson? Oh, Calvin, I'm not any good at English. Calvin groaned and turned to Miss Murry. I see what you mean. Here, I wouldn't want to teach. She's a little one-sided, I grant you, Miss Murry said. Though, I blame her father and myself for that. She still enjoys playing with her dollhouse, though. Mother, Meg shrieked in agony. Oh, darling, I'm sorry, Miss Murry said swiftly, but I'm sure Calvin understands what I mean. With a sudden enthusiastic gesture, Calvin flung his arms out wide, as though he were embracing Meg and her mother, the whole house. Oh, thank you for that, my friend. How did all this happen? Isn't it wonderful? I feel as though I were just being born. I'm not alone anymore. Do you realize what this means? Hello, friend. Haven't seen you in a while. I'm glad you can make it. It's finally summer for me, so I'm going to have more time to be on here and read more books. So, good to see you. Thank you for that, Heart-Me. Meg took a bunch of forks from the drawer and turned them over and over, looking at them. I'm all confused again. Oh, so I'm Calvin said. But how am I at least know where we're going somewhere? Meg was pleased and a little surprised when the twins were excited at having Calvin for supper. They knew more about his athletic record and were far more impressed by it than she. Calvin ate 5 bowls of stew, 3 saucers of Jell-O, and a dozen cookies. And then Charles Wallace insisted that Calvin take him up to bed and read to him. The twins, who had finished their homework, were allowed to watch half an hour of TV. Meg helped her mother with the dishes and then sat at the table and shrugged with her homework, but she could not concentrate. "Mother, are you upset?" she asked suddenly. Miss Murry looked up from a copy of the English scientific magazine through which she was leafing. For a moment she did not speak. Then, "Yes, why?" Again Miss Murry paused. She held her hands out and looked at them. They were long and strong and beautiful. She touched with the finger of her right hand and the broad gold band on the third finger of her left hand. "I'm still quite a young woman, you know," she said finally, "though I realize that that's difficult for your children to conceive. I'm still very much in love with your father. I miss him quite dreadfully. And in love with your father, I miss him quite dreadfully. And you think all this has something to do with your father?" "I think it must have, but what? That I do not know, but it seems the only explanation." "Do you think things always have an explanation?" "Yes, I believe they do. But I think with our human limitations, we're not always able to understand the explanation. But you see, Meg, just because we don't understand doesn't mean that the explanation doesn't exist." "I like to understand things," Meg said. "We all do, but it isn't as possible. Charles Wallace understands more than the rest of us, doesn't he?" "Yes. Why?" "I suppose because he's different, Meg." "Different how?" "I'm not quite sure, you know. Yourself, it's not like anybody else." "No, I wouldn't want him to be," Meg said defensively. "Wayne doesn't have anything to do with it. Charles Wallace is what he is. Different. New." "New?" "Yes, that's what your father and I feel." Meg twisted her pencil so hard that it broke. She laughed. "I'm sorry. I'm really not being destructive. I'm just trying to get things straight." "I know, but Charles Wallace doesn't look different from anybody else." "No, Meg, but people are more than just the way they look. Charles Wallace's difference isn't physical. It's an essence." Yeah, right here. It is A Wrinkle in Time is what we're reading. "No, Meg, but people are more than just the way they look. Charles Wallace's difference isn't physical, it's an essence." Meg sighed heavily, took off her glasses and put them back out again. "Well, I know Charles Wallace is different, and I know it's something more, I guess. I'll just have to accept it without understanding it." Miss Murray smiled at her. "Maybe that's really a point I was trying to put across." "Yeah," Meg said dubiously. Her mouth smiled again. "Maybe that's why our visitor last night doesn't surprise me. Maybe that's why I'm able to have a willing suspicion of disbelief, because Charles Wallace." "Are you like Charles?" Meg asked. "I? Heavens, no. I'm blessed with more brains and opportunities than many people, but there's nothing about me that breaks out my ordinary mold." "Your looks do," Meg said. Miss Murray laughed. "You just haven't had enough bias for comparison, Meg. I'm very ordinary, really." Calvin, coming in here, said, "Aha!" Charles, all settled, Miss Murray asked. "Yes. What do you read him?" "Genus, his choice. By the way, what kind of experiment were you working on this afternoon, Miss Murray?" "Oh, something my husband and I were cooking up together. I don't want to be too far behind when he gets back." "Mother," Meg pursued, "Charles says I'm not the one thing or another, not flesh nor fowl, nor good red herring." "Oh, for crying out loud," Calvin said. "You're Meg, aren't you? Come on, let's go for a walk." But Meg was still not satisfied. "And what do you make of Calvin?" she demanded. "A mother. Miss Murry laughed. I don't want to make anything of Calvin. I like him very much, and I'm delighted he's found his way here. Mother, you were going to tell me about Tesseract. Yes. A troubled look came in Miss Murry's eyes, but not now. Meg, not now. Go on out for that walk with Calvin. I'm going up to kiss Charles and then have to see that twins to bed. Outdoors, the grass was wet and dew. The moon was halfway up and dim. The stars for a great art. Calvin reached out and took Meg's hand with a gesture. As simple and friendly as Charles Wallace were, you're upsetting your mother, he asked gently. I don't think I was, but she's upset. What about? Father, Calvin led Meg across the yard. The shadows of the trees were long and twisted, and there was a heavy street. Autumnal smell to the air. Meg stumbled as the land sloped suddenly downward, but Calvin's strong hand steadied her. They walked carefully across the twins' vegetable garden, picking their way through the rows of cabbage, beets, broccoli, pumpkins. Looming out on their left were the tall stalks of corn. Ahead of them was a small apple orchard. Bound by a stone wall, and beyond this woods row, which they had walked the afternoon, Calvin led the way to the wall, and then they sat there, his red hair shining silverly in the moonlight, his body draped with patterns from the tangible branches. He reached up, pulled an apple, and handed it to Meg, then picked one for himself. Tell me about your father. He's a physicist. Sure, we all know that, and he's supposed to have left your mother and gone off with some dame. Meg jerked up from the stone on which she was perched, but Calvin grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her back. Hold it, kid. I didn't say anything that you hadn't heard already, did I? No, Meg said, but continued to pull. Let me go. Come on, calm down. You know it wasn't true. I know it isn't true. And now everybody, after one look at your mother, could believe any man would leave her for another woman. Just shows how far jealous will make people go, right? I guess so, Meg said, but her happiness had fled, and she was back in a morose of anger and resentment. Look, Dope, Calvin shook her gently. I just wanted to get things straight, sort of sorted out. In fact, from fiction, your father's physicist, that's a fact, yes. Yes, he's a PhD several times over. Yes. Most of the time he works alone, but some of the time he was at the Institute for Higher Learning in Princeton. Correct, yes. Then he did some work for the government, didn't he? Yes. You take it from there. That's all I know. That's about all I know, too, Meg said. Maybe Mother knows more. I didn't know. What he did was, well, it's what you call classified. Top secret, you mean? That's right. And you didn't even have any idea what it was? Meg shook her head. No, not really. Just an idea because of what he was. Well, where? Out in New Mexico for a while. We were with him there. And then he was in Florida at Cape Canaveral. And we were with him there, too. And then he was going to be traveling a lot, so we came here. You'd always had a house? Yes, but he used to live in it just the summer, and then you don't know where your father was sent. No, at first we got lots of letters. Mother and father always wrote to each other every day. I think Mother still writes him every day. Every once in a while, the postmistress makes some kind of creak about all her letters. I suppose they think she's pursuing him or something, Calvin said rather bitterly. They can't understand plain ordinary love when they see it. Well, go on. What happened next? Nothing happened, Meg said. That's the trouble. Well, what about your father's letter? They just stopped coming? You haven't heard anything at all? No, Meg said. Nothing. Her voice was very heavy with misery. Silence fell between them, and intangible as the dark tree shadows that fell across the laps and now seemed to rest upon as heavy as though they possessed a measurable weight of their own. At last, Calvin spoke in a dry, unemotional voice, not looking at Meg. Do you think he could be dead or unalive? Again, Meg leaped up. Again, pulled her down. No, they had not told us if he was unalive. There was always a telegram or something you always tell you. What do they tell you? Meg choked down a sob. Managed to speak over it. Oh, Calvin, Mother's tried and tried to find. There's been down to Washington and everything, and all they'll say is that he's on a secret and dangerous mission, and she can't be more proud of him, but he won't be able to communicate with us for a while, and they'll give us news as soon as they have it. Meg, don't get mad, but don't you think maybe they don't know? A slow tear trickled down Meg's cheek. That's what I'm afraid of. Why don't you cry? Calvin asked gently. You're just crazy about your father, aren't you? Go ahead and cry. It'll do you good. Meg's voice came trembling over tears. I cry too much. I shouldn't be like Mother. I shouldn't be able to control myself. Your mother's a completely different person, and she's a lot older than you are. I wish I were a different person, Meg said sharply. I don't like myself. Calvin reached over and took off her glasses. Then he pulled a handkerchief out of his pocket and wiped her tears. This gesture of tenderness undid her completely, and she did put her head down on her knees, and sobbed. Calvin sat quietly beside her, every once in a while patting her head. I'm sorry, she sobbed finally. I'm terribly sorry. Now you'll not like me. Oh, Meg, you are a moron, Calvin said. Don't you know you're the nicest thing that happened to me in a long time? Meg raised her head in the moonlight. Shone on her face without the glasses. Her eyes were unexpectedly beautiful. If Charles Wallace was a sport, I think I'm a biological mistake. Moonlight flashed against her braces as she spoke. Now she was waiting to be contradicted, but Calvin said, Don't you know that this is the first time I've seen you without your glasses? I'm blind as a bat without them. I'm nearsighted like Father. Well, you know what? You got dreamboat eyes, Calvin said. Listen, you go right on wearing your glasses. I don't think I want anybody else to see what gorgeous eyes you have. Meg smiled with pleasure. She could feel herself blushing, and she wondered if the blush would be visible in the moonlight. Okay, hold on, you two. Come, a voice out of the shadows. Charles Wallace stepped into the moonlight. I wasn't spying on you. Thank you for that, Hartme, he said quickly. And I don't like to break things up, but this is it, kids. This is it. His voice quivered with excitement. This is what? Calvin asked. We're going. Going where? Meg reached out and instinctively grabbed for Calvin's hand. I don't know exactly, Charles Wallace said, but I think to find your father. Our father. Suddenly, thank you for those gifts, my friend. Suddenly, two eyes seemed to be springing out of them in the darkness. It was the moonlight streaking out of Miss Who's glasses. She was standing next to Charles Wallace, and now she had managed to appear where a moment ago there had been nothing but a flickering shadow in the moonlight. Meg had no idea. She heard a sound behind her and turned around. There was Miss Whatsit scrambling over the wall. My, but what I wish you were there no wind, Miss Whatsit said primly. It's so difficult with all these clothes. She wore her outfit of the light, before her rubber boots, and all with the addition of one Miss Sheets, which she had draped over her. As she slid off the wall, and the sheets caught at a low branch and came off, they felt a slip over the booth, and eyes and another branch plucked at the pink stole. Oh dear, she sighed, I shall never learn to manage. Miss Who wolfed over to her, tiny feet scarcely seeming to touch the ground, the lenses of her glasses glittering. Said something in Latin. A claw-like hand, she pushed the hat on Miss Whatsit's forehead, untangled soul from the tree, and with a drift gesture took the sheet and folded it. Oh, thank you, Miss Whatsit said. You're so clever. And then said something else in Latin. Just because you're paltry few billion years. Miss Whatsit was startlingly indignified, with a sharp, strange voice cut and grass. All right, girls, this is no time for bickering. It's Miss Witch. It's Miss Witch, Charles Wallace said. There was a faint gust of wind. The leaves shivered in it, and patterns of moonlight shifted in a circle of silver. Something shimmering quivered, and the voice said, I do not think I will materialize completely. I find it very trangling, and we have much to do. So, we're starting to get to the point in the book where mysterious things are happening. Mysterious things are happening. We're getting into the more fantasy element of the book. But up until this point, we're seeing typical adolescent behavior from Calvin and Meg. Meg being our main character. I'm feeling like Calvin may be her first love interest in her story of her life. This is something that, her being around 12 years old, this is the time where we start, having these feelings of attractions. So we're going through all these troubles at school. We're going through all these new emotions with this boy. So she's getting a lot of excitement in her life, and that's what this book is kind of about. We're going through this coming of age story into this. We're about to hit the fantasy part of the story and the good versus evil. But it gives you that independent thoughts of these young children. So that's what's great about this book. We can all relate to this. We've all gone through this type of growth in our life. And Meg is going to do a lot of growing through this book. And that's why Wrinkle in Time is so important to have. I like middle schoolers to read this book because it's hitting that middle school years really hard with this. So that's what I like reading this book. Let's see, how long is chapter 4? This is the one with the black thing is what it's called. I'll read this next time, and then we get to the Chazarek. But yeah, now that it's summertime, I'll have more time to join with you, and I'll share the book right now. So we are reading A Wrinkle in Time. I'm Professor Fox in this Cozy Corner. We're reading A Wrinkle in Time. I like to read classical literature on my channel just to give you guys a taste of it, and you guys can discuss it. We can talk about it and try to give you some insight on the book and why it is important to read. But this is A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle, and it's a classic. It was written, copyrighted in 1962 is when it was written. This book is one of your most classical fantasy books. Has typical tropes of good versus evil, and also that very down-to-earth coming to age, and really gets you that sense of it's okay to rebel. It's the same thing that we're talking in the Harry Potter stories. It's the same thing. It's okay to have this little bit of mischief, because that little bit of mischief makes you your own person. It's okay to get in trouble sometimes. It's okay to go against the grain. Because if you just always go with what everybody else is saying, you're going to get in a lot more trouble down in life than you are with standing up for yourself. And that's what this book teaches you. So that's why you should read it. Wrinkle in Time. And then I'll also, before I go, I'll do a shout out to independent author here. My independent author friend. You can check out his book too. I'll pin that one, if it lets me pin it. Ha! It's only letting me. There it is. I pinned it finally. So this is Misconnection. I will shout this book out. This is Michael Lomano's book. It's his newest book. It's a thriller. If you like true crime stories, this is set in New York City. It is a very fast-paced true crime story with a man that is going through a tough marriage, and he meets another person. He does have an affair with that person, and it spirals into this uncontrollable foreseen about events into his life, and it makes a very exciting story. So you should check this out, Misconnection by Michael Lomano. I do recommend this book. It was a very fast read for me if you like true crime. But check those two out. I will be on again. This is Professor Fox signing out, and we'll be reading more of A Wrinkle in Time. So take care. I'll see you guys next time.